Here we are. Welcome back. And now I have to say, Barb, I'm really excited about this for a variety of reasons because I've heard about you, I've heard about Predictive Hire, and so I am eager to learn what you have in store, and I'm eager to facilitate a bit of a discussion with you once you get through your presentation. So first off, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing what you do. And if you would introduce yourself and a little bit about what you're talking about, and I'll disappear and I'll come back towards the end. That sound good?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
All right, have fun.
Thank you. And look, it's great that you've heard about us because we're all the way down under in Australia.
Yeah.
You can probably hear that from the accent, a different time of the day here. But so I'm Barb. I'm the CEO of Predictive Hire, and I think I first want to out myself by saying I'm neither a data scientist nor engineer, but I happen to lead a team filled with them. But I'm pretty passionate about how to actually interrupt bias in hiring, how to fix some of the broken hiring practices we still have, but most importantly, how to make sure that we all make decisions about HR technology that's fair, that's going to work for everyone and that you and your organisation can trust. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do that and what we've learned over the last couple of years. So one of the clients we work with is Qantas, and people often ask the question, why do you need technology to automate the candidate selection process? Well, reality is, as much as we'd love to interview everyone and get back to everyone, it's impossible when you're a business like that and you're getting thousands of applications a week. And when you just do the maths and you work out, if we had to interview everyone for a business of that scale, how much is it going to cost us? And you can see it's basically humanly impossible. So a big reason for thinking about AI is frankly just to save time. And I think another aspect of it in this day and age is people need a job, and they need a job fast. And if we can make a decision around giving you a loan in 24 hours, why can't we make a decision about offering you a job in 24 hours? So from the candidate perspective, I think there's a real sense of urgency to operate with a sense of urgency, particularly in the space we operate in, which is the hourly worker, the low-skilled worker. For them, it's kind of fundamental. Am I going to get food on the table for my family? The other aspect from a candidate is it kind of feels like this. If you're applying for a low-skilled job, you might have to do 25 applications. Maybe you'll get a couple of interviews to get one job. I'd say you probably double that these days, given the competition for jobs, and usually you get nothing. You hear nothing back and you're ghosted. And for people who've lost their jobs, it's dehumanizing how many jobs you have to apply for and to be ignored, frankly, in terms of that process. And I think for HR, now is the time to say, how do we actually really respect and dignify the candidate experience as much as also solve for what we're trying to do in the organisation around efficiency? The other aspect that we've also seen come up last year is the movement, Black Lives Matter, and really that all lives matter, and how do we make sure our recruitment is fundamentally inclusive? And what kind of worried me is the move towards video in a world of people working distributed. And the challenge with video is it's kind of productizing bias. Really, maybe I'm a bit controversial saying that, but it's pretty easy to be biased when you're looking at someone on the other end of the screen. And I think we need to think about, from the candidate side, how many of us love talking to a video? How many of us feel comfortable? If you have a stutter, if you've got autism, if maybe you're not that attractive, is it going to work for that group of candidates? We know that there's bias, and this is an Australian stat, but, I think it's pretty similar in the US. Maybe the names are different. There are fewer women running companies than men named John, Peter, or David. And frankly, women are graduating at greater rates than men in a lot of universities, often doing better from a score perspective, but yet they're not rising to the top. And I don't believe it's lack of ambition. I think the fair bit of it is around the way we run our hiring and promotion. Even in sectors that are female-dominated, like healthcare and education, we still see them being male-led. In Australia, we have a community of Indigenous people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and they struggle with employment. And we see again and again studies like this that says they're just not going to get jobs because we're biased. And mostly we don't mean to be, but we just can't help it. And if you look at Wikipedia, there's a whole range of biases, about 150 that are identified there. It's impossible to check our biases. Harvard has done some research around being attractive can help people get unfair advantages at work. And AI is a solution to that because it removes that human dimension. Maybe this is a bit naughty, but I've put in here a screenshot of a product that uses video to assess candidates. And I think, you know, if this was me, I'd love to look at her all day because she's beautiful. But what if you don't look like that? And how do we check ourselves about our instincts to trust and feel connected to people that make us feel better? And mirror hiring, if you haven't heard of that. I worked in a tech company as a head of HR, and generally what we saw is a lot of white male engineers hiring more white male engineers. And until you interrupt that with technology, with AI, you're going to keep seeing the same pattern. One of the things that I see a lot of organizations doing, and I'll confess I did this as well when I was working in HR, is train people, bring people into a room and say, let's be aware, self-aware of our biases. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, which I've kind of felt instinctively over the last few years, is it doesn't really make a difference because training is a moment in time and it's impossible for us to de-bias something that we're not aware of. So last year in December, the UK government announced that it was defunding all unconscious bias training across the civil service because their research had shown that it just doesn't work. So, you know, we want to hire inclusively. We want to remove bias. You can't train people out of their bias. We need AI to help us. And, you know, there are people that have worked in this space for years. One of them is a Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman, who has said, I think since the 60s in his experiments, you know, when you compare a process of an algorithm that has no noise, because as much as we think that machines are sentient beings, they're not. They work to our direction. And unless we feed it with noise, unless we feed it with bias, they're going to come out with the same repeatable, consistent approach, you know, minute after minute, day after day. And that's why AI is so powerful, because humans just cannot do that. Whereas AI does allow you to create a consistent approach that removes all of that noise that we bring as humans. So data is a powerful way to interrupt the bias, but aside from that, it also really brings clarity to decisions. You know, think of that time that you've heard feedback that says, you're not a great culture fit. I know I've used that as well to give feedback to a candidate. It's kind of a real cop-out. And what you need is explainability. I think everyone needs to be honoured with some insight about, why did I not get that job? Why am I not great for that role? And I think if you're making a decision around who to hire and who to promote, you owe it to your organisation to bring that clarity. And that means objective data. It's not going with our gut. It's going with something that's actually grounded in fact. And that's, again, what AI brings you. At the end of the day, AI is giving you data. And data is what allows you to be credible when you're making decisions. It's how business makes decisions. So why doesn't AI, HR do the same? So my view is I think we've got to embrace it, you know, and reality is it's everywhere, all around us. But we have to also do a lot of work to educate ourselves about what questions do we need to ask to trust it, because AI does come with great risk. And to quote Spider-Man, you know, I think with great power comes great responsibility, and that's where you all sit in that seat to investigate, to do the due diligence. You know, I think I'm an ex-lawyer. That's my background from about 30 years ago. And one of the things that I would love to see is more organisations bringing their legal team into these conversations, because there's a lot of pseudoscience out there. And I don't see enough leaders and decision makers asking the right questions to ensure that they're making responsible decisions that not only are legally compliant, but also morally responsible. You don't want this, right? Like, everyone knows the Amazon experience where they fed in a whole lot of CVs, and reality is, even if you remove the name, there's still latent signals around gender, around race, around socioeconomic that sit within the AI. And that is why we're passionate about not using what we call third-party data, not using social media data, not using CV data, not using data that is invisible to anyone, because one, you can't explain it, but two, you don't know what's going on in that data. I think we need to move beyond Amazon. You know, Amazon, by the way, didn't actually deploy it. They tested it because they have to. They probably get 15 million applications a year. And organisations need to figure out a way to do this, but we need to figure out a way to do it responsibly. That was about, I think, 2014. And I think one thing for us to recognise with it is that the scale of change and innovation and iteration has been enormous since then. So what kind of technologies should you be considering and looking at, and what questions to ask? The other thing that's kind of been quite prominent in the media over the last year or so has been, the concerns around using facial recognition. I think some really big organisations that we're more familiar with has sort of moved away from that now. The concern around discrimination, that's quite real when you feed that facial recognition data in, and it's why we also believe in blind hiring through chat, not through using signals that draw on what someone looks like and what's going on in their background. So fundamentally, the first really big piece of advice we'd have, and whether you use our technology or something else, is really question whether it's blind. The video is, incredibly hard to look at from a bias-free perspective, but also from a candidate inclusion perspective. It means don't look at technology that scrapes CVs, because it's impossible to remove those latent signals, and you definitely don't want to be relying on social media data. I think the other thing to really challenge in terms of those myths is, I don't want to be interviewed by a robot, and it's not this, right? And it's also not about AI taking away your jobs. One thing that I'm really passionate about is if you can use something that's going to make you smarter, that's going to empower you to make a better decision, that's going to make you more credible in your organisation, that's what AI is about. It's a co-pilot. It's not an autopilot. I really don't agree with the automated use of AI in recruitment. I think it's too early to do that. I think machines need to be supervised. And I think we need to go through a journey of people really trusting them and understanding them and embracing them. So for us, it's really about leveraging AI as a powerful co-pilot in your process, not replacing the human side. So how do you know if AI is fair and can be trusted? And what we've done and what I'm going to go through now is we in our team, for a while I've really steered the data science team to say, guys, I don't really care, and it's guys and girls, by the way, I don't really care how brilliant this is and the technical side if it's not something that I can trust and I can put my own name to and my own kind of passion to. And so we've had a framework for some time to hold us to account around the AI and how we're building it and the testing that we're doing. And we were sharing that with you now, and we've put it out in market. You can find it on our website. It's what we call FAIR AI in recruitment. And, in the absence of a global standard regulation, because we all know that regulation is years behind technology innovation, we don't want another social media disaster, right? Like if you think about Social Dilemma, it's no coincidence that the protagonists in that show were white men of a certain age. And we're very conscious about our responsibility, and we want you to be as well. Like, what does this look like? Self-regulation, self-assessment, and manage the risk. So this is a bit of a framework that we find quite useful to really help people understand and unpack what's going on in an AI system. And the fundamental dimension we look at is around fairness. And fairness is not limited to the predictive outcomes. It's not about just looking at the AI. It's actually looking at the whole end-to-end system, which means the very start of it from the candidate side and how inclusive that is and how fair that is, through to the AI, through to actually the information that you give to your recruiter to guide them on their decision. So we really advocate a holistic examination of the entire ecosystem when thinking about, is it fair? And we chose fair as the primary dimension because it kind of makes sense. We have a bit of a framework that we think about, how do you determine whether something is fair? Fair for us is whether or not the system is respectful and considerate of people from a range of groups, a range of protected attributes. And it requires you to really think about 4 key dimensions. The first is it unbiased? And, you cannot take that as an assertion, right? You have to really look at the bias testing, and bias testing needs to be done in the beginning, when it's deployed, and ongoing. The second thing about bias testing is it can't just be about race or gender. Frankly, the EEOC's benchmark is not good enough. It isn't comprehensive enough. We think you need to look beyond that. You need to look at people with neurodiversity requirements. You need to look at people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different ages. Ageism is a bigger bias for women these days than actual gender bias. So when you think about the bias examination, you've got to look at it on a continuous basis and a very broad basis. Apart from whether it's unbiased, is it inclusive? And there are a number of ways that you can think about inclusivity, and we measure it looking at things like, what's the completion rate? How many candidates are doing this and valuing it and trusting it? What kind of candidates are doing it? Are we finding people with neurodiverse attributes are completing it to the same degree as people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, the same degree as race and gender? You've got to think about that in your metrics, and you've got to be asking for those metrics from your vendors. Obviously, validity is critical. I'm not going to go into that, other than to say that you should be looking at the tech manual. I think it's fair to expect the organisation whose technology you're using to make your most critical decisions, who you hire and who you promote, has a tech manual and that they're willing to share the science. We've actually chosen to publish our science. We've effectively given away our IP because we believe that you can't trust us if you don't see, well, how the science works. And explainability, it's why we made a choice not to use deep learning, because you can't explain it. We think that if you're going to trust it and your people are going to trust it and your candidates are going to trust it, everyone needs to know how it works. And you need to see the very obvious connection between someone's score and their profile and what the technology is doing. So that, for me, if you think about, and again, I put my HR hat on, the importance of trust and the currency of trust in HR. If you talk to your board or your CHRO or head of HR, trust is what really drives engagement. Trust is what drives your ability to get shit done and move fast in an organisation. And I think it needs to be a really important dimension to how we think about AI. So the two sides that we think matter when you're looking at the technology is you got to look at the technology, right? You got to look at the product and ask all those questions. But you also have to look at us. You have to look at the organisation and say, do I see diversity in this team? Because I think it's a fair ask to say, are you going to build something that's just going to mirror existing biases within your engineering team? So what does that team diversity look like? And it's got to be beyond race and gender. I think it's got to be much broader than that. To also look at the system and how it protects and governs and keeps safe your candidate data and your data and protects the security of that. And, there are kind of table stakes accreditation you can look at. But beyond that, I think you've really got to understand what's their culture around that. We have a view that candidate data is the crown jewels. We don't sell it to any third party. We don't use it for any reason other than for the purposes of providing you that service. And we certainly don't scrape data without candidates' consent, because that's a recipe to destroy trust. So I think that's something is also really important to look at. And the last one, which is actually probably the most important, is transparency. Is the organisation actually sharing with you what they're doing around all of this? Is that visible? Is that accessible? Do you trust it? Do you believe it? So that for us is a kind of the yin and yang of what HR leaders and TA leaders really need to be looking at very closely before they're selecting an AI technology. This is a beautiful slide that our head data scientist put together for me, but I'll happily share this deck with anyone afterwards. But, just to give you an idea of what this testing needs to look like, it's got to go beyond the 4/5. You've got to look at more than gender and race, and you've got to look at the life stats. You can see here some of the testing results from the recent testing that we did around a broad group of candidates. And then you also want, on the right-hand side, you want to look at, actually, what am I seeing real time? I think one thing that's really important is you're not going to change bias in your organisation unless you've got data on it. And so you want to be able to track what's going on with our applicant profile, and are we seeing something similar in our high profile? The surest way to signal potentially that there's bias is where you've got a real dissonance. When you're hiring 80% whites, but your balance of applicants is very mixed. That allows you to take it to your leadership and say, hey, we're seeing something here that's worrying us. Let's talk about it. If you don't have that, you're never going to change mindsets. So one of the things that we do is we track that only in our dashboard. We allow you to see what's actually going on from a gender and from a race perspective in terms of your hiring outcomes. Validity is really important. You have to look at face validity. I think for us, and I've been through many psych tests, I really don't want to ask a question that this doesn't feel regular and normal to people. Would you rob a bank if you could get away with it? I want to ask them a question that I'd ask them in an interview. Tell me about a time that you had to really lean in and solve a difficult problem. What did you learn from that? That's a question that people really relate to. And we see that when people respond on the feedback, is they kind of feel like they have their own voice. They can share their story in their voice and they understand the questions. And I think that also enhances trust. You also then want to look at, on the right-hand side, some important metrics around validity. I won't go into that, but for those who are particularly in the IO space, really important to be asking those questions around precision and recall. So fundamentally, we believe that you have to bring in data if you're really looking to level up around making good decisions, making fair decisions, making consistent decisions. You can't do it using human recruiters. You have to bring AI technology in, and you have to go beyond relying on your gut. Explainability is really important. As I said, that's a core element of what we do. Can you explain the predictions? Like, a fast route to losing trust with your internal customer base is when you can't actually explain why someone was good or not. Have a profile that's grounded in facts to give to them, something like what we have on the right-hand side. Give candidates feedback and make sure that the science that you're using is actually grounded in science. And I think one of the things about science I get asked a lot, if your technology is being built by engineers, how do you make sure that they're not just encoding their own bias? AI is like any other science, right? When you think about science, think about climate change science. You start with a hypothesis, you do your research, you publish your research, and you make it something that people can challenge, right? It's something that can be shot down, it can be critiqued, and that's really important. And I think that's what, again, we would ask vendors to be doing, is publish your science so that you can critique it. Without that, how do you really know what's going on under the hood? I'm just going to flick through here because I want to get to the end and allow time for questions. I think inclusivity is absolutely critical, particularly when you're doing low-skilled hiring. Everyone deserves an opportunity at a job, right? And you have to go beyond gender and race. You have to look at people with neurodiverse background. I'll share with you that recent research we did showed that the candidates who performed the best, who were most likely to be recommended, were actually people who were autistic, and they did it the fastest. Now, how many autistic people are going to do an interview by video? How many of them are you missing out on that great talent because you haven't got a candidate assessment that's really inclusive? So from the candidate's perspective, what we're seeing is, instead of going from ghosting and getting nothing here and hearing just maybe an email that says, we'll let you know, what you get back is something that really helps you learn. And it's not a position on a data point of where you sit in your percentile against your peer group, right? Maybe if you're a graduate, that's going to work, but we're humans. I want to hear something that my coach would say. I want to hear something that really is going to help me succeed in my interview, help me articulate what my strengths are, which makes people feel amazing. To the recruiter, what you get is something which really helps understand them. What's their score? Where do they sit in the candidate pool? Where do they sit in the job family? And what are their key attributes? The things that we care about these days are not the hard skills, it's the soft skills. Accountability, your level of initiative, your level of resilience, like that. This is the kind of feedback we get. If you're interested in seeing what candidates say, we actually live stream it on our website. Just go and sit there for a few minutes, you'll see. But it's completely transformative for candidates, and we're really feeling like we're making a difference to the community, not just to your brand. So I guess I challenge you, if you had a choice picking between a human screening, only giving a few people an interview, only relying on a CV to tell you whether someone's great and getting asked a question like, if you're an animal, what would you be? Versus something that's truly blind, gives everyone a fair shot, gives you many, many data points that are objective and allows you to ask meaningful questions, I know which one I'd pick. And I'll just leave you with this little image because I think in a way it's quite provocative. It makes you really think about, what does a level playing field look like, in the hiring and in the promotion space right now?
Hey, Barb, that was fantastic. Can you try and reshare?
So I'm just going to figure out how to do that. Hang on. Okay, where am I here? So can you see me now, or am I still sharing?
I can see you, no problem. I just don't see your slides. If not, it's no big deal.
Okay, great.
All right. Hey, I don't want to get distracted by that because it was truly fantastic. And I want to highlight a few things. You have, for lack of a better way to put it, a very courageous stance because many data-centric or analytical-centric approaches just want data for data's sake, and they think about the problem from an academic problem-solving point of view as opposed to a humanistic point of view. And you've made a conscious decision around, no, we're not going to incorporate that data. So, I just want to call that out and celebrate it because there is this, and you highlighted this, the legislation, the rules, even the ethical standards are not keeping up with the pace of innovation. And so we have to have some frameworks. The vendors, such as yourselves, do. We in organizations in HR and in the legal profession, of which obviously you have a background, need to have positions on it and have our adverse impact analyses be ongoing, because we just don't know what the tail is of these activities. However, you've mitigated the risks. So when I first heard of predictive hire, I was like, gosh, that can be really dangerous. And now that I hear you, it's actually just the opposite. It's like you're taking a really virtuous stance on what's appropriate and what's not. So anyway, it's fantastic. So thank you for showing up in the way you do. I have a question with the limited time. Who what type of organization, like as you were going through, I'm thinking, there needs to be an evolved leader who understands the risk to say, hey, guy, they're getting all these peppered, information like predictive analytics and, get this social media data and all this. And like, oh gosh, okay, I'll do that. However, you're coming in and saying, no, this is appropriate. So I think of like a public benefit corporation or those privately held companies that have the ability to control their culture more. So who is your buyer at this stage? Is it an evolved leadership team? Is it an evolved, HR organization, or is it really everybody? Are you, competing quite well, even with the limited knowledge or education of the consumer at this point?
Yeah. So it's definitely on the evolved, mature, smart side. Mm-hmm. We work a lot with retail, because if you think about the commercial side of retail, they make every decision every minute of the day based on data, their entire business and how they stock their shelves. And so there's an appreciation in that executive team that actually using data makes a lot of sense. It's a way to optimize for better outcomes. And in the case of recruitment, it makes a lot of sense too. And I think most retailers and hospitality, they're rejecting 99% of people, often in six figures. Mm-hmm. And business is now seeing that's a real risk if the way we're doing that in recruitment is not working for candidates. Yep. So we're kind of the bridge between the organization and the business and HR. And so for an HR leader that's very data savvy, that's very commercial, and who wants to actually have a seat at that table, right? That doesn't see HR as just about measuring culture and engagement. I think engagement's a bit of a false positive when it comes to whether or not you're building a great team, but actually really wants to drive business outcomes. Because one of the things you get with AI is obviously we use data to help improve accuracy, which means over time you reduce churn, you increase sales. And who doesn't want, as an HR leader, to feel like you've not just impacted on your people, you've really impacted on the business. Right. I think the other one is I'd love to say government. We work with government quite deeply in Australia, but I think if there's one sector that needs to really role model inclusivity and data-driven decision-making, it should be government organisations. Yeah. The other opportunity we're seeing now is, one of our new clients is a business called Afterpay. It's a ridiculously successful tech company here that's now gone into the US. And for them, they need to compete on talent. And so they're looking for a way to do two things. Firstly, scale their growth through technology, make sure they're scaling their culture through technology. So most cultural decisions are made by you and I having a chat over coffee with a bunch of people and deciding, yep, that kind of feels good. There's no science to that, and that's where you get to mirror hiring. So because we're able to detect traits, most traits aligned to cultural values, accountability, humility, a learning mindset. You can screen for that using our product. So they're using our technology as a cultural screen, but also as a way to introduce more people into the talent pool where they're competing with Facebook and Google and Apple, et cetera, for talent in Silicon Valley. So it's quite a point of difference in the employer brand, but more importantly, it also makes sure that if you're hiring hundreds of people, as you grow, you do that through technology, not through, biased coffee chat conversations.
Yeah, well, as we wrap, I want to do two things. Number one, I want to invite you to continue this conversation on my podcast if you're up for it, because there's a host of things that I'd like to get into with you, because I think you have a beautiful approach, and it's a voice, and it's in a position that needs to be heard more widely. I mean, we need to educate the consumer as well as hold others accountable and I look at myself because I have a research background. So I was a Yahoo, give me more data. And that was, of course, nearly 20 years ago in retail, by the way. Yeah. So it's now the case where, hey, we have so much data, there's again, adverse impacts. So, it's really, your thoughtful, virtuous approach. Again, I want to learn more about it, and I want to, get it out there. So, thank you for doing what you do. The second thing is, I'm a little upset that you just reminded me of Melbourne coffee, best in the world, and I'm not going to have it anytime soon. So therefore, I just have to suffer with the thought of, having a couple guys. There you go, guys, rub it in. No, but again, we have to stop now. But how can people learn more about you and Predictive Hire?
Come to our site, predictivehire.com, and take the test. I think, people got to try the candidate experience and then go and do your own recruitment process. I think I'd love people to actually apply for a job in their own organisation and see, does that feel great? Is that really efficient? And then come and do our test and see what you think.
Okay. Well, again, thank you. I'll take the test and hopefully I'll pass. I don't know. But yeah, we'll talk again. So thank you much. Be well. And keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks so much. Bye now.
Bye, Barb.